There's currently a major problem happening right now in gaming history. According to the Video Game History Foundation, a shocking study reveals 87% of classic games are critically endangered. Only 13% of video game history is currently represented in the marketplace. This means nearly 9 in 10 classic games are only available by obtaining the original hardware, visiting a video game library, or the last resort, piracy. With technology moving at a fast pace, it's becoming more difficult to find classic games on Steam or any other website that's available. A good example of this problem is the Nintendo eShop. When Nintendo made the announcement of closing down the 3DS and Wii U eShop on March 27, 2023, casual gamers and historians will be cut off from accessing hundreds of titles. This results in pirating more games or looking for other options that are available. The gaming market size is over $250 billion, and it's most likely not going to shrink anytime soon. The film industry is very different from the video game industry. If I want to watch a movie called Duck Soup, I wouldn't have an issue finding a streaming platform to watch the movie on. But if that didn't exist, the only way for me to watch the movie is by finding or buying a film reel. I most likely wouldn't have the time or money to do this. It sounds insane, but unfortunately that's the reality we live in with video games. So this begs the question, why is it difficult to bring back old games? The short answer is complicated. Let me explain. For the rest of the video, I'll be going over a lot of information from the small publisher Sneg. In the last couple years, Sneg has been dedicating their time and resources making sure that classic video games are made available again on the digital storefront like Steam. In last year, the publisher Sneg was responsible for the release of 8 Dungeons & Dragons across Steam and GOG, as well as a bunch of classic Mindscape SSI games like Star Command and Fantasy, among others. This wasn't easy to pull off. Re-releasing old games required a ton of detective work on behalf of the team to track down all the necessary rights, as well as find the appropriate team that could ensure they run properly on today's modern hardware. For the most part, the company has kept a low media profile, mostly avoiding doing interviews and focus all their time and energy bringing back classic games. In this video, I'll go over information from the publisher as to why it's difficult to bring back old games. So exactly, how did Sneg start as a company, and why did the publisher decide to focus on old school games? The founder, Shoiko, talked about having experience playing and working on video games back in the late 2000s and early 2010s. He noticed that Steam was getting popular at the time and retro game stores were slowly starting to disappear. Around that time, Shoiko ended up signing a publishing distribution deal for one of the classic games developed in Russia while working at another company. The game was called Eodor, and it was supposed to be released on Steam and some other storefronts, so the creator Alexei was looking for possible distribution options. That is when Shoiko came across a storefront called GOG.com. Long story short, Shoiko started working for GOG and spent the next 7+ years looking for old games. GOG stands for Good Old Games. It's a digital distribution platform for video games and films. GOG delivers DRM free video games through its digital platform for Microsoft Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. Anyways, that's how it all started, and it continued like this for quite some time, but Shoiko started to not like his job due to the fact that he's working at a giant corporation and he felt like he wasn't really working with classic video games for the majority of his day. That was true for both him and his partner, Oleg, who was a gamer, was the one who started the company Sneg. Let me go back to these games. Even though Dungeons & Dragons was related to such a big property, these games were still hard to track down, even more difficult to bring them to Steam. Shoiko describes these games as, it's never easy to republish them. To briefly summarize the process, there's typically a company that develops the game, then there's the publisher, then over time somebody acquires the publisher, then somebody else acquires that publisher, then it snowballs, merger after merger. After 10+ years, you might run into nobody remembered what happened. Nobody remembers where the paper trail was or who actually has the rights to these old games. So the job is to slowly do the detective work on figuring out who's involved in the deal making of these games. What are the legal conditions involved here? What is the IP laws in the US compared to Japan? So you basically end up in a messy situation every time and you try to slowly unravel it. The outcomes can be very different every time. The rights can be with someone who is dead, so you have to look for the relatives. It could be sitting in a big private company. It might be split across multiple companies. It can be split across the development team because of local laws. It might be that one party owns the IP and another party owns the programming code rights, but the publishing rights may be sitting with a third party. There are also the music rights too, which can also stay with the musician. There's a ton of copyright laws that are being used in a situation that will require a lawyer to clear things up. There can be so many different combinations of that. There might also be royalty obligations somewhere between different parties. So yeah, what I'm trying to say is, it's a mess. So there's a great deal of complexity that you can encounter when doing this job, and there's no shortcuts to doing this. Unfortunately, you have to learn who, as individuals, were involved with different deal making. Then it's just about investing time and dedication, going to different trade shows, meeting people, talking to them, doing interviews like, do you remember anything about this deal that happened X amount of years ago? So exactly, why is it important to bring back these old games when the majority of the people probably never heard about them? The only answer I have is nostalgia. Nostalgia plays a key role in this. The emotion of nostalgia is the same regardless of when you were born or what game you were playing. You understand how important these games are, so you don't need an explanation on why these games are important for a lot of people. Especially if you dig through all the archives and see how significant culturally and design wise these games were. As of right now, the only staff at Sneg is Shoiko and his partner. It sounds difficult, but it's actually kind of useless to attempt to build from a practical point of view because it's very hard to have just one team that is working on all kinds of different games. Some games require a massive effort of engineering work. For example, the game Chasm: The Rift, which was released on October 10th of 2022, the source code for that game was completely lost. There was nothing, so the game has to be reverse engineered to a certain extent and then redeveloped with a certain feature set, because there was just nothing that could be used. There had to be a bunch of new technologies adapted to make this game work. Another example I want to go over is that there's a game called Siege of Avalon, which was written in Delphi. There are almost zero people in the world who are currently developing games professionally in Delphi. So it is very hard to find someone to address certain issues. So the point I'm trying to make is, Sneg is always looking for a particular skill sets for a particular task, and it would be impossible to have a team with all the expertise at this current moment. Shoiko talked about wanting to bring certain games back, hopefully in the near future. The first one is Evil Islands. It was released in 2000. It's a stealth action game set in a fantasy universe. Another game that Shoiko wants to bring back is Parkin, which is kind of like No Man's Sky 20 years ago. He also wants to bring back No One Lives Forever, Neverhood, and so on. There are currently a lot of titles that are sitting unavailable for legal reasons, for technical reasons, or a combination of those two. Overall, it's just an infinite amount of work to be done. Sometimes people are confused like, this is just a dead market, why would you waste time on this? But if you look closely, you'll see that more and more games are becoming unavailable. Every year, something becomes classic, and every year, something becomes unavailable due to legal reasons or old technology. So it's just a snowballing amount of games that need to be saved, fixed, and made available for users. Shoiko talked about the most difficult game as of right now to bring back is Blade of Darkness. Shoiko and his partner started to get the rights back in 2012, but they ran into a roadblock. They couldn't figure out at the time who owned the rights to this game. There were a lot of stories behind that one. Somebody appeared claiming they have the rights and it turned out to be false, so it took almost a decade to figure out who owns the rights. Then once Shoiko was able to talk to the proper owners, there was another challenge to agree on signing this game and enabling it to be revived. And then the challenge of the source code being lost and figuring out who from the original development team may have an archive of the code. All these steps were eventually resolved and it resulted in the game being re-released, but still with a lot of bugs and issues that Shoiko tried to address with moderate success. It's been an uphill battle to assemble all of that and release it, but we're quite proud that we've managed to assemble this thing. There are also other games that are very complex, but are still ongoing. Shoiko calls them cases, and we have a ton of cases that we are working on simultaneously. Like I said, it's very slow detective work, and I appreciate the publisher Sneg and other parties that are involved in bringing back old games. See you guys next time, and thanks for watching.